The old upright piano sat in the corner of Mrs. Chen's music shop, its mahogany finish dulled by years of neglect. A layer of dust covered the fallboard, and a small handwritten sign read, "As is, $300." No one had shown interest in the tired instrument for months. No one except 12-year-old Michael. Michael had been blind since birth. He lived with his mom, Elaine, in a small apartment above the laundromat where she worked 6 days a week. Their town in Michigan wasn't much to look at, just a handful of streets with family-owned shops, a diner that served the best blueberry pancakes in the county, and a park where Michael loved to sit and listen to the world around him. Though he couldn't see, Michael experienced life through his other senses, especially sound. The rustling leaves told him when fall had arrived. The echo of footsteps revealed the size of a room. And music. Music painted pictures in his mind more vivid than any his eyes could have seen. "Mom, can we go to Mrs. Chen's again today?" Michael asked one Saturday morning, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the kitchen table. Elaine glanced at the stack of bills by the toaster. "Honey, we've been there 3 times this week. Mrs. Chen is going to think we're casing the place." "Just for a little while? Please?" There was something in his voice, a gentle persistence that Elaine found hard to resist. 30 minutes, she said, reaching for her coat. "I need to pick up groceries anyway." The bell above the door jingled as they entered the music shop. Mrs. Chen looked up from her newspaper and smiled. "Back again, are we?" "Let me guess, straight to the piano?" Michael's face lit up at the familiar voice. "Is it okay if I play it a little?" "Of course, dear. It's not doing anyone any good just sitting there." Elaine watched as her son navigated confidently through the shop, his white cane tapping lightly against the floor. He'd memorized the layout after just 2 visits. 23 steps from the door to the piano, with a slight turn at the guitar display. Michael settled onto the bench, running his fingers lightly over the keys before pressing one. The note rang out, slightly flat but full of character. To most people, the piano would have seemed out of tune, in need of professional attention. To Michael, it was perfect. He began to play a simple melody, something he'd heard on the radio that morning. His fingers found the notes as if they'd been playing for years, though he'd never had a lesson in his life. Mrs. Chen stopped what she was doing. Elaine noticed the shopkeeper's expression change from polite interest to genuine surprise. "How long has he been taking lessons?" Mrs. Chen whispered. "He hasn't," Elaine replied. "We can't afford them." Michael shifted into something more complex, a classical piece that had been playing in the dentist's office the previous week. His small hand stretched across the octaves, finding chords that he had no business knowing. A customer who had been browsing sheet music wandered over, drawn by the sound. Then another. Soon a small crowd had gathered around the old piano, watching as the blind boy with the faded blue sweater and second-hand shoes filled the shop with music that seemed to come from somewhere else. When he finished, there was a moment of silence before the small group broke into applause. Michael turned, startled by the sound of clapping hands. A shy smile spread across his face. "That was beautiful," Mrs. Chen said, her voice thick with emotion. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Michael shrugged. "I just listen and then my fingers remember." On the walk home, Elaine was quieter than usual. Michael could sense she was thinking hard about something. Her footsteps had that hesitant quality they got when her mind was elsewhere. "Mom? Are you okay?" She squeezed his hand. "I'm just thinking about how amazing you were today." "It's not that big a deal," he said, kicking at a stone on the sidewalk. "I just like how the piano makes me feel. Like I can see things." That night, after Michael had gone to bed, Elaine sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and the stack of unpaid bills. She did the math once, twice, then a third time. Even with every penny of her savings, they would be cutting it close. Very close. For the next 2 weeks, Elaine took on extra shifts at the laundromat. She started doing alterations for neighbors, a skill she hadn't used since before Michael was born. She sold the old television they rarely watched anyway, and the silver bracelet her grandmother had given her. Michael noticed the changes. The longer hours his mom was working, the new quietness of their apartment without the TV's background noise. But when he asked questions, Elaine would just kiss the top of his head and tell him not to worry. One rainy Tuesday after school, Michael's neighbor, Mr. Powell, picked him up instead of his mom. "Your mother asked me to bring you somewhere special," the old man explained as he helped Michael into his car. "It's a surprise. They drove for about 10 minutes before stopping. When Mr. Powell opened the car door, Michael immediately recognized the smell of the music shop, wood polish and paper, and the faint scent of the cinnamon candies Mrs. Chen kept in a jar by the register. "Why are we at Mrs. Chen's?" he asked, confused. His mom usually called ahead if they were going to visit the piano. "You'll see, or well, you know what I mean," Mr. Powell said with a gentle laugh. "Come on." The bell jingled as they entered. Michael could hear several people inside, his mother's familiar footsteps, Mrs. Chen's soft voice, and someone else he didn't recognize. "Mom? Over here, sweetie." Her voice sounded strange, tight with excitement. Mr. Powell guided him toward the sound. When they stopped, Elaine took his hand and placed it on something solid and familiar, the smooth wooden curve of the old piano. "What's going on?" Michael asked. "It's yours," Elaine said simply. "The piano. It's coming home with us." Michael's mouth fell open. His fingers gripped the edge of the instrument as if it might disappear. "But how?" "We can't afford—" "Don't you worry about that," his mother said, though there was a catch in her voice that told him it hadn't been easy. "Mrs. Chen gave us a very special price, and Mr. Gallo from the moving company is donating his services to get it up to our apartment. It'll be a tight fit," chuckled the unfamiliar voice. "Mr. Gallo, presumably. But we'll make it work." For once, Michael was speechless. His hands moved across the piano in disbelief, tracing its imperfections, its character. "There's one more thing," Mrs. Chen said. He heard her footsteps approach, then felt her press something into his hand, a small card. His fingers traced the raised dots of Braille. "Piano lessons," she explained. "Once a week with my sister. She teaches music at the community college." I don't know what to say," Michael stammered, overcome. "You don't have to say anything," his mother told him. "Just play," and so he did. As the adults watched with misty eyes, Michael's fingers found the keys and began to weave a melody. Not a song he'd heard somewhere, but something new, something of his own making. It spoke of gratitude and joy and a future suddenly rich with possibility. Later that evening, after an adventure involving 3 grown men, a very narrow staircase, and more than a few colorful words, which Elaine tried unsuccessfully to prevent Michael from hearing, the piano sat proudly in their small living room. Some of the furniture had to be rearranged, and Elaine's reading chair now lived in her bedroom, but no one minded. As Michael sat on the bench in his pajamas, his fingers exploring his very own piano in the quiet of their apartment, Elaine watched from the doorway. She thought of the bills still to be paid and the extra hours she'd need to work. She thought of the sacrifice of her grandmother's bracelet and the months of careful budgeting ahead. Then her son began to play, and the music filled their little apartment with something that had been missing before, and she knew that no price was too high for this moment, for the look of pure happiness on her son's face as his fingers danced across the keys of the old piano that had finally found its home. 6 months flew by, and the old piano became the heart of Michael and Elaine's apartment. Every day after school, Michael would rush home, throw his backpack on the couch, and sit down to play. The piano was the first thing he touched in the morning and the last thing before bed. Mrs. Chen's sister, Ms. Lily, came every Wednesday at 4:30 for his lesson. She was patient and kind, though often left speechless by her young student's abilities. "He has what we call perfect pitch," she explained to Elaine one afternoon as Michael played in the background. "He can identify any note just by hearing it. But more than that, he has a gift for understanding music that can't be taught." Michael soaked up everything Ms. Lily offered: proper finger positioning, music theory, the language of sheet music translated into Braille. But what amazed her most was how he could hear a piece once and play it back perfectly, then make it his own with subtle changes that somehow made the music even more beautiful. "You need to understand," Ms. Lily told Elaine quietly. "This isn't normal. I've been teaching for 30 years and I've never seen anything like this." Word spread around their small town. Neighbors would happen to be passing by when Michael was practicing, lingering in the hallway outside their apartment. The owner of the local diner asked if Michael would play for his wife's birthday party. Then came a request to perform at a retirement home, and another for the elementary school talent show. Elaine worried about putting too much pressure on him, but Michael seemed to bloom under the attention. His shyness fell away when he sat at the piano. The same boy who sometimes struggled to join conversations became completely at ease when his fingers touched the keys. One snowy morning in February, Ms. Lily arrived for their lesson practically vibrating with excitement. "You'll never guess who's coming to town next month," she said, unwinding her scarf as she stomped snow from her boots. "Thomas Reed." Michael's hands froze over the keys. The Thomas Reed? The one who played at the Royal Albert Hall? Even Elaine knew that name. Thomas Reed was one of the most celebrated pianists in the world, famous for his interpretations of Chopin and his own haunting compositions. "The very same," Ms. Lily confirmed. "He's doing a charity concert at the college auditorium. And," she paused dramatically, "he's holding a master class the day before. I've already signed you up." Michael's face went pale. "Me? But I can't. I'm not ready for someone like that to hear me play." "Nonsense," Ms. Lily said firmly. "You're more than ready. Besides, it's a rare opportunity. He almost never teaches students, especially ones your age." For the next few weeks, Michael practiced harder than ever. He chose to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, challenging enough to show his skill but not so difficult that he'd stumble under pressure. He played it over and over, refining each phrase until Elaine knew the piece as well as he did. The night before the master class, Michael couldn't sleep. He sat at the piano in his pajamas, playing so softly his fingers barely made a sound. Elaine found him there at midnight, his face tight with worry. "Talk to me," she said, sitting beside him on the bench. "What if I mess up? What if he thinks I'm not any good?" "Then he'd be wrong," Elaine said simply. "But that's not going to happen." "You don't know that. I do know that." She took his hands in hers. They were getting bigger now, stretching toward manhood. "Listen to me. When you play, you speak a language that most people spend their whole lives trying to learn. Whether Thomas Reed sees that or not doesn't change anything about who you are or what you can do." Michael leaned his head against her shoulder. "Will you be there?" "Front row," she promised. "Though I might have to skip out early to get to my shift." The college auditorium was packed with students and their parents the next day. Most were from the local music school, kids who'd been taking lessons for years, their expensive instruments carried in sleek cases. Michael sat clutching his Braille sheet music even though he didn't need it. Ms. Lily found them seats near the front as promised. "Remember," she whispered to Michael, "he's just a man who happens to play the piano well, just like you." But when Thomas Reed walked onto the stage, the hushed reverence that fell over the crowd made it clear he was much more than that. He was tall and lean, with a shock of silver hair despite being only in his 40s. He moved with an elegant precision that commanded attention. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice carrying a slight British accent. "Thank you all for coming. I understand we have quite a range of talents here today." He began by talking about his approach to music, then invited the first student to play. A teenage girl performed a complex Bach piece, her fingers flying over the keys with technical perfection. Thomas Reed listened intently, then spent 10 minutes pointing out minute flaws and suggesting improvements. One by one, students took their turn. Some played brilliantly, others nervously missed notes. Thomas was demanding with each of them, but never cruel. He seemed to instinctively know how far he could push before confidence would crumble. When there were just 2 students left before Michael's turn, Elaine squeezed his hand. "I have to go to work now. You're going to be amazing." "Mom, wait. I'm sorry, sweetie. I couldn't get anyone to cover." She kissed his forehead. "Ms. Lily will record it on her phone, and you can tell me everything tonight." After she left, Michael felt his nervousness return tenfold. The student before him finished playing, receiving polite applause. "Michael Chen," Thomas Reed read from his list. "Are you here?" Ms. Lily nudged him. "Go on." Michael stood unfolding his white cane. There was a murmur in the audience as people realized he was blind. He made his way carefully to the stage, counting steps under his breath. 16 to the stairs, 3 steps up, then 9 to the piano. "Do you need assistance?" Thomas asked, his voice neutral. "No, thank you. I know where I'm going." Michael found the bench and sat down, placing his hands on the keys to orient himself. He took a deep breath and began to play. The Nocturne filled the auditorium. Michael's fingers moved with certainty, finding the emotional heart of Chopin's composition. He'd played this piece 100 times in practice, but somehow in this moment, it became something new, more vulnerable, more alive. The final notes lingered in the air, then faded to silence. For a moment, no one spoke. Then came the applause, more enthusiastic than for any previous student. Michael's cheeks flushed with embarrassment and pride. When the clapping died down, Thomas Reed cleared his throat. He paused. That was quite good. How long have you been playing? About 7 months, sir, Michael answered. With lessons, I mean. A ripple of disbelief went through the crowd. Thomas raised his eyebrows. 7 months? That's impossible. He had a natural affinity before formal training, Ms. Lilly called from the audience. But yes, just 7 months of proper instruction. Thomas approached the piano, studying Michael with new interest. And you're what, 12? 13? 13 last month, sir. Thomas seemed to be reconsidering something. Would you mind if I played something for you? I'm curious about something. Without waiting for an answer, he gestured for Michael to move over on the bench. Their shoulders nearly touched as Thomas positioned his hands on the keys. Listen carefully, he said, and began to play. It was nothing Michael had ever heard before, complex. Modern, with dissonant chords and a rhythm that seemed to constantly shift. Thomas played for exactly 2 minutes, then stopped abruptly. Thank you for your time, Michael. You may return to your seat now. Confused, Michael made his way back down the steps, feeling strangely disappointed. He'd expected more feedback, more instruction. Had he done something wrong? The final student played, and the masterclass concluded. As people gathered their belongings, Michael felt a hand on his shoulder. Mr. Chen, said Thomas Reed's distinctive voice, a word before you leave. Ms. Lilly hovered nearby as Thomas led Michael to a quiet corner. That piece I played, Thomas said without preamble. It's something I composed last week. No one has heard it but me until today. Could you play it back for me? Michael hesitated. The whole thing? As much as you remember. Michael nodded and allowed himself to be led back to the piano. The auditorium had mostly emptied now, with just a few stragglers gathering their things. He placed his hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and began to play. The nearly empty auditorium fell silent as Michael's fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment. Then, like water finding its path downhill, his hands began to move. The piece that Thomas Reed had just played, his own unpublished, unrecorded composition, flowed from Michael's fingers, note for note. Not only did Michael capture every complex chord and shifting rhythm, but he somehow found the emotional center of the music, the intention behind it that perhaps even Thomas hadn't fully recognized. Ms. Lilly watched from the sidelines, her hand pressed to her mouth. A few students who had lingered in the back rows leaned forward in their seats. One pulled out a phone and began to record. When Michael finished, he sat quietly, waiting for a response. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. That was interesting, Thomas finally said, his voice carefully neutral. You have a good ear. Michael tilted his head slightly, confused by the coolness in the famous pianist's tone. Thank you, sir. How did you learn to copy like that? Thomas asked, the question sharper than his previous comments. I don't know. I just hear it and then I can play it. Thomas stood up from the bench. Well, it's certainly an impressive party trick. You might make quite a career as a human recorder. He gathered his notes from the top of the piano. Playing for fun is fine, but I should tell you that real music, the kind that matters, isn't about mimicry. It's about interpretation, understanding, years of disciplined study. Ms. Lilly stepped forward, her face flushed with indignation. Mr. Reed, with all due respect, what Michael just did was extraordinary. He has a gift, yes, I can see that, Thomas cut her off. But gifts without direction are just novelties, Ms. Wang. Lily Wang. Ms. Wang. I've seen many talented children in my time. Those who succeed are the ones who put in the work, not just those with natural ability. He checked his watch. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for tomorrow's concert. With that, Thomas Reed walked briskly off the stage, leaving Michael still seated at the piano, his face a mask of confusion and hurt. On the bus ride home, Michael was quieter than Ms. Lilly had ever seen him. He's wrong, you know, she said firmly. What you did was remarkable. Michael shrugged, his fingers tapping restlessly on his knees. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm just copying without really understanding. That's ridiculous. You weren't just copying the notes, you were playing the music. There's a world of difference, she sighed. Some people, even brilliant ones like Thomas Reed, can be limited in how they see things. When they reached Michael's apartment, Elaine was still at work. Ms. Lilly helped him inside and made him a sandwich, which he barely touched. Will you still go to the concert tomorrow? She asked. Michael considered this. I think so. Even if he doesn't like how I play, I still like how he plays. Ms. Lily smiled. That's a very mature way of looking at it. She glanced at the clock. I should go. Your mother will be home soon, and you can tell her all about today. After she left, Michael sat in the quiet apartment, his mind replaying the afternoon. He moved to the piano and began to play Thomas Reed's composition again, but this time he changed it. He softened some of the harsher transitions, expanded one of the melodic lines, and added a counterpoint in the lower register that somehow made the whole piece more complete. He was so absorbed that he didn't hear the door open. That's beautiful, Elaine said, setting down her purse. Is that what you played for Thomas Reed? Michael stopped abruptly. Sort of. I changed it a bit. Well, tell me everything. How did it go? He wanted to protect her feelings, to hide his disappointment, but he'd never been good at lying to his mom. Not great. As the whole story spilled out, Elaine's expression shifted from excitement to disbelief to anger. He said what? That you're just a human recorder? He didn't use those exact words, but yeah. Well, that's just... She seemed at a loss for words, then sat down heavily on the couch. I'm sorry, sweetie. I thought this would be such a good opportunity for you. It's okay. Michael joined her on the couch. It's not your fault he's a jerk. The word made Elaine laugh despite her anger. Language, she said automatically, then shrugged. Although in this case, I think that's being polite. The next evening, Michael and Elaine dressed in their best clothes. Michael in the suit he'd worn to his grandfather's funeral, now slightly too small, and Elaine in a simple blue dress she saved for special occasions. Ms. Lily had gotten them tickets to Thomas Reed's concert as a Christmas gift months ago. We don't have to go, Elaine said as they waited for the bus. We could go to the movies instead. Michael shook his head. I want to hear him play his own music, the way he meant it to be played. The college auditorium was packed, the atmosphere buzzing with excitement. They found their seats in the back row, the only tickets Ms. Lily could afford, just as the lights dimmed. Thomas Reed walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. He bowed deeply, then seated himself at the grand piano. Without a word, he began to play. For the next hour and a half, the audience was spellbound. Thomas moved seamlessly from classical pieces to his own compositions, his technical skill undeniable. Even from the back row, Michael could feel the precision of each note, the intentionality behind every phrase. During intermission, people around them chatted excitedly. Isn't he magnificent? A woman behind them gushed. Such control, her companion agreed. Such discipline. Michael said nothing, but his fingers moved slightly in his lap, following the music still echoing in his head. When the second half began, Thomas Reed addressed the audience for the first time. For my next piece, I'd like to play something new. It's a composition I've been working on that explores the tension between structure and improvisation, discipline and freedom. He paused. It's still evolving. As he began to play, Michael sat up straighter. It was the same piece Thomas had played for him the day before, the one he'd asked Michael to repeat. But something was different. Thomas had changed it. The harsh transitions were softened, the melodic line expanded, and there was a new counterpoint in the lower register that made the whole piece feel more complete. They were Michael's changes. Elaine noticed her son's sudden stillness. What is it? She whispered. He stole my ideas, Michael whispered back, his voice tight with disbelief. What do you mean? The changes I made to his piece yesterday, he's playing them. All of them. Elaine's hand tightened around his. Are you sure? Positive. When the piece ended, the audience erupted in applause. Thomas Reed accepted it with a humble nod, then spoke into the microphone. Thank you. As I said, that piece is still evolving. In fact, it's taken a rather unexpected turn in the last 24 hours. He looked out over the audience, and for a moment, Michael had the strange feeling that Thomas was looking directly at him, which was impossible from that distance, especially in the darkened auditorium. Music has always been a conversation across time, Thomas continued, between composer and performer, between tradition and innovation. Sometimes that conversation takes us places we never expected to go. He played 3 more pieces, then stood to take his final bow. As the audience rose in a standing ovation, an usher appeared at the end of Michael and Elaine's row. Excuse me, he said, having to raise his voice over the applause. Are you Michael Chen? Michael nodded, surprised. Mr. Reed would like to see you backstage after the performance. Elaine's eyebrows shot up. Really, why? The usher shrugged. I'm just delivering the message, ma'am. As the crowd began to file out, Michael and Elaine followed the usher through a side door, down a narrow hallway, and into the area behind the stage. They were led to a small room where Thomas Reed was toweling off his face, his silver hair damp with sweat from the performance. Michael, he said, turning to face them. Thank you for coming. He nodded to Elaine. And you must be his mother. Please, come in. Michael stepped forward cautiously, his cane tapping on the tiled floor. I believe I owe you an apology, Thomas said, his voice much warmer than it had been the day before, and perhaps more than that. The small backstage room felt even smaller with Thomas Reed's presence filling it. He gestured toward a pair of folding chairs. Please, sit. Elaine guided Michael to one of the chairs, then sat beside him, her posture stiff with protective instinct. I want to be direct, Thomas said, leaning against a makeup table. Yesterday I misjudged you, Michael, badly. Michael's fingers twisted together in his lap. You used my changes in your piece. Yes, Thomas admitted without hesitation. I did, and they improved it immeasurably. Elaine leaned forward. Why did you dismiss him yesterday if you thought his ideas were so good? Thomas ran a hand through his damp silver hair. Pride, probably. Or fear. He turned his attention back to Michael. Do you know how long I've been working on that composition? Michael shook his head. 3 years. I've rewritten it dozens of times. I've played versions of it for the finest musicians in Europe, and none of them could hear what was missing. He paused. But you heard it immediately. After one listen, the room fell quiet except for the distant sounds of the audience leaving the auditorium. Thomas moved to a chair opposite Michael. Last night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing your version in my head, the way you softened that transition in the middle section, the counterpoint you added to the third movement. It was, he struggled for the right word. It was exactly what the piece needed, what I'd been searching for and couldn't find. Michael's face remained cautious, uncertain. So I have 2 things to say to you, Thomas continued. First, I'm sorry. What I said was wrong and frankly beneath me. I reacted badly because you challenged something I believe very deeply, that mastery only comes through years of discipline and study. And the second thing? Elaine asked when he didn't immediately continue. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes intent on Michael. I'd like to hear you play again. Not copying someone else's work, but making it your own. The way you did with my composition. Michael's head tilted, considering this. Now, if you're willing. After a moment, Michael nodded. Thomas stood and led them back to the now empty auditorium. The grand piano still stood on stage, gleaming under the lights. As Michael made his way carefully up the steps, Thomas touched Elaine's arm to hold her back. There's something you should know, he said quietly. What's that? She asked, her tone still guarded. He nodded toward a row of seats where a woman in a sharp business suit sat watching them. That's Catherine Winters from the Juilliard School of Music. She's an old friend here to see my performance. I asked her to stay. Elaine's eyes widened. Juilliard? But that's one of the most prestigious music schools in the world, yes. Thomas gave her a small smile. Let's see what she thinks of your son. On stage, Michael settled himself at the piano. What should I play? He called out. Whatever speaks to you, Thomas replied. Michael's hands hovered over the keys for a long moment. Then, with a deep breath, he began to play. He started with Chopin, the same nocturne he'd performed at the master class, but within moments, the piece began to transform. He kept the emotional core of Chopin's work while weaving in elements that were clearly his own. The melody soared in unexpected directions, sometimes achingly sweet, sometimes thunderously powerful. From the original piece, Michael crafted something new, something that spoke of darkness and light, of a boy who couldn't see the world but could hear its deepest secrets. His small frame seemed to grow as he played, his face tilted slightly upward as if receiving the notes from somewhere beyond. In the third row, Catherine Winters leaned forward, her pen forgotten over the notebook in her lap. When the final notes faded, Michael sat still, his hands resting lightly on the keys. The silence that followed felt sacred, as if no one wanted to break the spell he had cast. Finally, Thomas began to applaud, the sound echoing in the empty auditorium. Elaine joined him, tears streaming down her face. Well, said Catherine Winters, standing up and making her way to the stage. That was unexpected. Michael turned toward her voice. Who's there? Michael, this is Catherine Winters, Thomas explained, joining them on stage. She's the head of the pre-college division at Juilliard. Oh, Michael said softly, his confidence suddenly replaced by shyness. Hello, Catherine studied him with keen eyes. How old are you, Michael? 13. And you've been playing for about 7 months with lessons, Elaine supplied, coming to stand beside her son. He had a natural affinity before that. Catherine raised an eyebrow. 7 months? She turned to Thomas. Is this some kind of joke? I had the same reaction, Thomas assured her. But I've been testing him since yesterday. It's real. Do you know what you just did? Catherine asked Michael directly. Michael shook his head. You just created a spontaneous, improvised variation on Chopin that incorporated elements of jazz, modern classical, and something entirely your own. She shook her head in amazement. I have graduate students who couldn't do that after 10 years of training. Thomas placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. Catherine and I have been talking. There's a special program at Juilliard for exceptional young musicians. Full scholarship, specialized instruction. It's very competitive. They only take 2 or 3 students a year. And you want me to apply? Michael asked, his voice small but hopeful. Catherine laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Apply? My dear boy, after what I just heard, I'm ready to create a spot for you right now. Elaine's hand flew to her mouth. But we live in Michigan. New York City is we couldn't possibly afford. The scholarship covers housing, Catherine explained gently. And there are stipends for family members who need to relocate. We don't separate children from their parents, Ms. Chen. This is all happening very fast, Elaine said, her voice unsteady. Michael reached for her hand. Mom, are you okay? I'm just overwhelmed. She squeezed his fingers. This is everything we could have hoped for. It's just a lot to process. Take some time to think about it, Catherine suggested. Talk it over. But I should warn you. Her voice took on a teasing quality. I'm not known for my patience when I find a truly exceptional talent. As they discussed details and exchanged contact information, none of them noticed a maintenance worker at the back of the auditorium, watching with interest. He had been emptying trash cans when the music started and had stopped to listen, his phone recording the entire performance. By the next morning, the video was already gaining traction online. Blind boy pianist transforms Chopin. You won't believe he's only been playing for 7 months, read the caption. Comments poured in from around the world. I've never heard anything like this. Who is this kid? He's incredible. I'm a classical pianist with 20 years experience and I'm in tears. This is pure genius. The video reached 50,000 views by noon. By evening, it had passed 1 million. In their small apartment, Michael and Elaine were oblivious to their sudden internet fame. They sat at the kitchen table with notebooks and calendars spread out before them, trying to map out what a move to New York might look like. I'd have to find a new job, Elaine said, making another note. The cost of living is so much higher there. Catherine said they help with that, Michael reminded her. I know, but still. She sighed, rubbing her temples. It's your education, your future. I just want to make sure we do this right. Michael's phone, a basic model Elaine had gotten him for emergencies, buzzed on the table. That's the 5th time in an hour, Elaine noted. Who keeps texting you? Michael picked it up. It's Ms. Lily again. She says we need to turn on the TV right now. Channel 7. Confused, Elaine reached for the remote and switched on their small television. A news anchor's voice filled the room. Video that has the music world buzzing. Recorded last night at a private performance following Thomas Reed's charity concert. It shows 13-year-old Michael Chen, who according to sources has been playing piano for less than a year. The screen switched to a slightly shaky but clear video of Michael at the grand piano. Lost in his improvisation on Chopin, Elaine gasped. How did they? Who recorded? Her words trailed off as the news anchor continued. The video has gone viral, with over 2 million views in less than 24 hours. Critics and professional musicians have been stunned by the young pianist's natural ability and emotional depth. We're joined now by Professor Robert Klein from the New York Conservatory of Music. Professor, what makes this performance so special? A distinguished-looking man appeared on screen. What we're witnessing is extraordinarily rare, a true musical prodigy. The technical skill alone would be impressive in someone with years of training, But the musicality, the interpretation, it's as if he understands the language of music on an instinctive level that most of us spend our lives trying to achieve. The phone in Michael's hand began to ring. He answered it automatically. Hello? Michael? It's Thomas Reed. Have you seen the news? We're watching it right now, he replied, his voice faint with shock. What's happening? Thomas's laugh carried through the phone. What's happening, my young friend, is that your life is about to change. And if you'll let me, I'd like to help you navigate what comes next. 2 years could change everything, Michael thought as he ran his fingers across the Braille program. Carnegie Hall. His name was on the program at Carnegie Hall. Nervous? Thomas asked, adjusting his bow tie in the mirror of the small dressing room. Michael smiled. Terrified. Good. The day you stop being nervous before a performance is the day you should quit. Thomas turned to face his student. How's your mother holding up? Probably more nervous than I am. She's been ironing my shirt for 20 minutes. The door opened and Elaine stepped in, carrying Michael's freshly pressed white shirt. The wrinkles were being stubborn, she explained, slightly breathless. 2 years had changed her too. The constant worry lines around her eyes had softened. Her hair was cut in a stylish bob instead of the practical ponytail she'd worn for years. The apartment in New York, paid for by the Juilliard Scholarship and supplemented by Thomas's Foundation for Young Musicians, had given her space to breathe, to find work she enjoyed at a small publishing house instead of endless shifts at the laundromat. Mrs. Chen, said Catherine Winters, appearing in the doorway, we should take our seats. They'll be opening the doors in 15 minutes. Elaine nodded, then turned to her son. She straightened his collar, a gesture so familiar it made Michael smile. You've got this, she whispered, and kissed his cheek. After she left, Thomas sat down across from Michael. Ready for our ritual? It was something they'd started the first time Michael had played publicly after moving to New York. Before each performance, they would sit quietly together for exactly 2 minutes. No talking, no last-minute advice, just stillness before the storm of music. When the 2 minutes ended, Thomas stood. I'll see you out there. Wait, Michael called as his teacher reached the door. I never asked. Why did you change your mind that night? After the master class? Thomas paused. You really don't know? No. Because when I heard you play my composition, not just repeat it, but improve it, I realized something I'd been fighting my whole career. He leaned against the doorframe. That true music isn't just about technique or years of study. It's about having something to say. And you, Michael Chen, have more to say through music than most people will in their entire lives. With that, he left, closing the door softly behind him. Michael changed into his concert clothes, black pants, white shirt, black jacket. No tie. Thomas insisted they were instruments of torture and unnecessary for a pianist. The clothes still felt strange, formal in a way that made the night feel even more momentous. There was a gentle knock at the door. 5 minutes, Mr. Chen, called a stagehand. Michael took a deep breath and picked up his cane. The journey to this moment had been a whirlwind. After the video went viral, everything happened with dizzying speed. Interview requests poured in. Music critics debated how someone so young with so little training could play with such technical skill and emotional depth. Offers came from record labels, television shows, even a movie studio interested in his life story. Through it all, Thomas had been his shield and guide. You need to focus on your development, not on being a curiosity, he'd insisted. Together with Catherine and Elaine, they crafted a careful plan. Michael would attend Juilliard's pre-college program. He would give occasional performances, enough to build his reputation, but not so many that his education would suffer. And most importantly, he would be allowed to remain a 13-year-old boy who happened to play piano, not a spectacle. The first months at Juilliard had been hard. The other students, most of whom had been playing since they were toddlers, regarded him with a mixture of fascination and resentment. The instructors didn't know what to do with him. His technique needed refinement, but his musical intuition surpassed many of theirs. There were whispers in the hallways. Overrated. Flash in the pan. Won't last a year. But Michael had surprised them all. He soaked up instruction like a sponge, his technique improving at a rate that astonished even Catherine. More importantly, his unique gift for interpretation, for finding the heart of a piece and making it his own, only grew stronger. Thomas had been right to protect him from too much early exposure. By the time this concert was announced, debut at Carnegie Hall, Thomas Reid presents Michael Chen, the novelty of his story had faded enough that people were coming to hear him play, not just to see the viral sensation. The stagehand knocked again. "It's time, Mr. Chen." Michael stood, took his cane, and followed the sound of the stagehand's footsteps. The rumble of the audience grew louder as they approached the stage. 2,000 people had come tonight. The thought made his stomach tighten. At the edge of the stagehand whispered, "Straight ahead, 20 steps to the piano. Mr. Reid is already at the microphone." Michael nodded his thanks and stepped into the light. The audience's applause washed over him like a wave as he walked carefully toward the center stage. He could sense the massive space around him, feel the expectation hanging in the air. He found the piano bench exactly where it should be and sat down, placing his cane beneath the grand piano. As the applause continued, he oriented himself at the keyboard, fingers finding middle C as his anchor. Thomas was speaking now, his voice carrying through the hall. "Extraordinary privilege to introduce a young man whose musical journey has been unlike any I've witnessed in my 40 years as a performer. When we first met 2 years ago, I made the mistake of telling him he should play just for fun. Tonight, I'm honored to invite you to hear why I was so gloriously wrong." More applause. Then silence as Thomas took his seat in the front row. Michael closed his eyes, a habitual gesture, though it made no difference to his darkness. He took a deep breath, lifted his hands, and began to play. He started with Chopin, an homage to that first performance that had changed everything. But from there, he journeyed through pieces that showcased his growth, a challenging Liszt etude, a playful Debussy that made the audience chuckle, a thunderous Beethoven sonata that had the power to shake the hall. For the final piece of the night, he played an original composition, something he and Thomas had been working on for months. It told his story without words, the darkness that had been with him from birth, the discovery of music as a light in that darkness, the painful moments of doubt, and finally, the joy of finding his voice. As the last note faded, the audience rose to their feet. The sound of their applause filled the hall, washing over Michael like a physical force. He stood, bowed once, then again. Thomas joined him on stage, took his elbow, and guided him back to center stage for another bow. "They love you," he whispered. As well they should. When the applause finally died down, Michael was led backstage where Elaine waited with tears in her eyes. She wrapped him in a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," he replied, his own voice thick with emotion. The dressing room quickly filled with well-wishers, Catherine and faculty from Juilliard, critics who had followed his development, even a few of his classmates who had come to support him. Later, after most of the crowd had dispersed, Michael found himself sitting with Thomas and Elaine in a quiet corner. "So," Thomas said, "what did you think of your Carnegie Hall debut?" Michael considered the question. "It felt like coming home. Like I've been working my whole life to get to that piano on that stage, even before I knew music would be my life." Thomas nodded. "That's how it should feel. What happens next?" Elaine asked, practical as always. Thomas laughed. "Next, this is just the beginning. There will be more concerts, recordings, maybe international tours when he's ready. And college," Elaine added firmly. "A well-rounded education is still important." "Of course," Thomas agreed with a smile. "Though I suspect our young friend here will be doing some of the teaching, even at a place like Juilliard." Michael sat quietly, taking it all in. 2 years ago, he had been a blind boy in a small town, playing an old piano in a cramped apartment. Now the world of music had opened to him, not because he could see the notes on a page, but because he could hear the truth behind them. "Michael?" A young staff member appeared with a phone. "There's a call for you from the Berlin Philharmonic. They want to discuss a possible guest performance next season." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Told you. Just the beginning." Michael smiled as he reached for the phone. The famous pianist had been right about one thing and wrong about another. He had been right that mastery took discipline and study, but he had been wrong to dismiss what Michael had known instinctively, that music wasn't just about playing the notes as written. It was about finding the spaces between the notes, the truth behind the sound, and in that space, a blind boy had found not just a skill or a career, but a light that everyone could see.